When you think of horror, cute anime girls aren't exactly the first thought that crosses your mind. And when you think of horror games, dating sims definitely are not at the top of that list either, right? I mean, who would be scared by talking to girls? Am I right, guys? Well, in any case, upon first glance at this game, nothing about it seems to resemble anything scary whatsoever. Yet, that tag is there. Psychological horror. It can't be true, right? I mean, nothing about this makes you exactly want to hide under your covers. But then you watch the trailer and there it is again. Big and bold this time as well. So you buy the game, press play, thinking it has to be a joke, right? But once again, there it is. This time it's a warning. At this point you gotta be feeling uncomfortable. And if you're not, you sure are curious. I mean, you must be dying to know what these words in front of you mean. As you reread the warning multiple times, you decide to accept the invitation the game gives to you, and then it starts up. Doki Doki Literature Club, or DDLC, is a visual novel created by indie developer Dan Salvato way back in 2017. And although Doki Doki was his first game, he definitely knew his way around the video game industry. You see, Dan Salvato is a former professional Smash Bros. Player. He even had experience with modding, as he has contributed to the creation of Smash Bros. Mods such as Project M and 20XXTE. Okay, so hearing this makes you wonder now, how the hell did modding Smash Bros. Turn into the creation of this cute yet horrifying game with anime girls? Well, as it turns out, Dan had a sort of love-hate relationship with anime and visual novel games. He loved them for their rich stories and the potential they had, yet he found that most followed the same predictable formula and style, having the same cliché plots and tropey characters. He wanted to create something that would turn the genre on its head, something that would shatter the expectations of what a visual novel could be. And I mean, I think it worked. The game was a huge hit that managed to stand on its own in an already packed year with big titles, the launch of the Switch, and other great indie games. Now, what do you say we check out the story and see what really made this game so special, shall we? Alright, so the story begins with the protagonist, a nameless high school student who is invited by his childhood friend to join the literature club. Despite hesitating at first, he eventually agrees and is introduced to the 4 members of this club. Sayori, his childhood friend, a bubbly and cheerful girl who always looks out for others. Natsuki, a feisty and stubborn girl who has a soft side for cute things. Yuri, a quiet and intelligent bookworm with a love for horror. And Monika, the perfect and charismatic club president. The game's mechanics center around writing poems to impress one of the girls. You choose a word that you think the girl you want to swoon would like, and you keep doing that till you've chosen 20 of them. The first act plays out as you'd expect for a traditional dating sim, allowing the player to form a relationship with their chosen love interest while attending club meetings and sharing poetry with others. However, from the very beginning, there are small signs that something is wrong. Sayori occasionally makes unsettling comments about feeling empty, and despite her cheerful demeanor, she sometimes seems distant. Yuri shows hints of obsessive tendencies, lingering too long on certain phrases and expressing an unusual fascination with the protagonist. Natsuki, while outwardly aggressive, has moments where her behavior seems oddly controlled, almost as if she's hiding something. Even Monika, who's not a romance option at all, occasionally makes remarks that seem to be too aware of the game itself. These subtle warning signs are easy to ignore at first, but they foreshadow the nightmarish turn the game is about to take. As the player grows closer to Sayori, she eventually confesses that she suffers from severe depression. She explains that, despite always trying to make others happy, she has struggled with feelings of worthlessness her entire life. If the player chooses to confess feelings for her, she momentarily appears joyful, but there's a lingering sadness behind her words. If the player does not return her feelings, she reacts with understanding, but is deeply pained. No matter what choice is made, Sayori's fate is already set in stone, and the next morning, when she doesn't show up to school, the protagonist visits her house, and he finds Sayori's lifeless body hanging from the ceiling. Right after this, the game abruptly crashes. The cheerful music cuts out, and distorted text fills the screen. The protagonist, in shock, questions whether he could have prevented this. But the player, you, quickly realize that this moment was unavoidable. With Sayori gone, the relationships between the remaining girls start to deteriorate. Yuri, who was already shy and introverted, becomes disturbingly obsessive, fixating on the protagonist in ways that seem unnatural. She speaks in unsettling ways, detailing the beauty of human eyes and knives with a fascination that borders on psychotic. Natsuki, who normally acts tough, seems increasingly fragile, and at times her sprite even glitches out completely, her eyes blanking out as if her entire character is being forcibly rewritten. The entire game becomes more unstable. Dialogue boxes display corrupted text, and at times, the player's control no longer seems to matter. Yuri's downward spiral eventually reaches its peak when she professes her love to the protagonist in an unsettling, intense monologue. Once again, no matter what you say, she stabs herself to death. The protagonist is left sitting in a classroom with her lifeless body for an entire weekend. As time visibly passes in-game, with the lighting shifting as Yuri's corpse slowly decaying in an excruciatingly long sequence. It's only after this disturbing period of isolation that Monika finally intervenes, deleting Natsuki and Yuri from the game entirely. Now, all that's left is the protagonist alone with Monika. The game's environment disappears, and the player finds himself trapped in a void with her sitting across from them. She reveals that she's been self-aware the entire time, knowing she exists inside of a game and resenting the fact that she was never given a romance route. She confesses that she tampered with the game's code to make the other girls more unstable, increasing Sayori's depression, Yuri's obsession, and Natsuki's suffering. Monika's goal all along was to eliminate the other characters so that she could have the player alter herself. At this point, the game completely breaks the fourth wall. Monika directly addresses you, the player. She comments on the game's mechanics and expresses an unsettling amount of awareness of reality. The only way to escape from this purgatory is to manually delete Monika's character file from the game's directory. Once the player does this, Monika expresses sadness, but ultimately accepts her fate. However, before disappearing, she restores the game one last time. Just this time, she's the one who's gone. With Monika deleted, the game appears to return to normal. Sayori is back and has taken over the role of club president, and everything seems to be as it was before. However, just as the player begins to relax, Sayori suddenly begins to display Monika's self-awareness. She thanks the player for deleting Monika and promises to make the literature club a happy place. But then she pauses. Sayori starts to distort. Her sprite glitches and it becomes clear that she's about to suffer the same fate as Monika. But before that can happen, Monika interferes for the last time. In a final act of mercy, she deletes the entire game world, refusing to let anyone suffer any longer. The screen fades to black, while Monika sings a beautiful song as the credits roll. When the game reaches its final moments, Monika leaves just one last message for the player. At first glance, Doki Doki Literature Club seems to be nothing more than a typical dating simulator, set in a charming high school environment where the player interacts with a group of cute anime girls. With its bright colors and lighthearted premise, it lures players in with the promise of harmless fun. However, beneath the surface, DDLC is anything but a typical game. The real horror of Doki Doki Literature Club lies in its ability to manipulate both the characters and the player, to blur the lines of reality and fiction, and to explore profound psychological and existential horror that forces players to confront their own place within the game. The first horror of Doki Doki Literature Club isn't something that immediately presents itself. Instead, it's something that lurks beneath the surface, waiting to unsettle the player. Upon starting the game, players are introduced to a group of characters: Sayori, Natsuki, Yuri, and Monika. Each girl embodies a typical archetype found in many visual novels. The bubbly one, the tsundere, the shy bookworm, and the perfect club president. The initial impression is one of comfort and familiarity. The game begins with players spending time with the characters, writing poems and choosing their interactions. It feels safe and expected even. It's a simulation of high school life with romantic options and lighthearted drama. But the sense of normalcy is precisely what makes the horror so effective. DDLC lulls players into a false sense of security, using the conventions of the visual novel genre to make them feel more comfortable and familiar with the world they're interacting with. The world is quaint, the characters are endearing, and everything appears to be in order. This normalcy, however, becomes a tool for the game's deeper, more disturbing manipulation. By presenting itself as an innocent dating sim, Doki Doki Literature Club preys on players' expectations, creating a gradual sense of unease that they are unlikely to recognize until it's too late. As the game progresses, the manipulation intensifies. While Sayori, Natsuki, and Yuri initially seem as typical characters, it soon becomes apparent that their personalities and actions are not as straightforward as they first appeared. Sayori, the cheerful childhood friend, reveals that she suffers from severe depression, and her tragic fate forces players to confront the darkness lurking behind her otherwise bright personality. Yuri, the quiet, reserved girl, becomes increasingly obsessive and unstable, fixating on the protagonist in disturbing ways. Natsuki, initially the tough, strong girl, is shown to be fragile and broken in her own way, hinting at a deep pain that is gradually revealed. This manipulation of characters is not just an exploration of their individual struggles, it's a carefully crafted psychological game that makes players feel responsible for these changes. The protagonist's interaction with these girls directly influence their behavior. Every poem you write, every choice you make, pushes them further down the path of instability. The horror here is that their fates are tied to your actions as the player. You're not just observing their suffering, you're actively shaping and contributing to it. This sense of responsibility makes the horror more personal, as players realize they're responsible for the torment these characters experience. But the true terror of Doki Doki Literature Club is not just the manipulation of the characters, it's manipulation of the very concept of the game itself. As the plot progresses, it becomes clear that DDLC is more than just a visual novel. It's a game about a game, a meta-commentary on the very nature of storytelling and player agency. The most unsettling part of this is that Monika, the club president, is aware of the game's artificiality. She breaks the fourth wall, making comments that directly acknowledge the player's presence, referencing their actions and even showing awareness that she is a game character. Monika's self-awareness is not just an eerie quirk, it is a full-blown existential crisis within the narrative. She knows that she's in the game, and as the story unfolds, she uses this knowledge to manipulate both the characters and us, the player. Monika's self-awareness transforms the game from a simple visual novel into a haunting experience. She starts to actively manipulate the game's code, causing other characters to suffer. Sayori's depression spirals out of control, Yuri's obsession turns violent, and Natsuki's fragile psyche unravels. Monika's ultimate goal is to eliminate the other characters so that she can have the player all to herself. This manipulation is horrifying, not just because of the cruelty it inflicts on the other characters, but because it forces players to confront the nature of their own involvement. In a traditional game, players are in control all the time, making choices and guiding the narrative. But in DDLC, the game takes that control away, showing that the player's choices have been nothing more than a mere illusion. The horror of Monika's actions go far beyond her manipulation of the characters. It speaks to the deeper, more existential terror of Doki Doki Literature Club. When Monika finally forces the player to delete her character file, she makes an incredibly disturbing statement. She acknowledges that she exists within the confines of this game, and she accepts her fate as a character trapped inside a broken system. But her actions don't end there. After being deleted, Monika leaves behind a haunting message, forcing players to confront the very nature of reality within the game. The existential horror of Doki Doki Literature Club comes from its ultimate message that there is no escape. No matter how many times the player tries to change the outcome, the cycle of manipulation and destruction continues. The characters are trapped in a world of suffering, created and controlled by an external force. In this world, there are no true choices, no happy endings. Even when Monika is deleted and the game seems to be reset, the player is confronted with another equally disturbing version of this reality. The game world cannot escape the broken loop that defines it. This sense of hopelessness, of futility, is the core of Doki Doki Literature Club's horror. The player is made to feel complicit in the destruction of the characters, and yet the game system remains unchangeable. It's a world where nothing is real, where free will is nothing but an illusion, and where escape is impossible. This horrifying realization is what makes Doki Doki Literature Club stand out more than just a simple horror game. It forces players to confront the very nature of their existence within a digital world. It's a game that manipulates not just its characters, but you, the player. It draws you into a nightmarish cycle of helplessness and despair. In the end, the true horror of Doki Doki Literature Club lies not in the jump scares or grotesque imagery, but in its ability to manipulate the very fabric of reality itself. By breaking down boundaries between the player and the game, it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we are not as in control as we like to believe. The game's unsettling mix of psychological manipulation, existential dread, and meta-commentary leaves a lasting impact, making it one of the most haunting and unique gaming experiences ever created. Doki Doki Literature Club is a game that defies expectations, pushing the boundaries of what a typical visual novel can be. One of the central themes of Doki Doki Literature Club is the exploration of player agency and the illusion of control. At the start of the game, players believe that they have the power to shape the narrative through their choices. They're encouraged to write poems for different characters and select different dialogue options that determine who they will spend time with and how they interact with other characters. However, as the story progresses, it becomes increasingly clear that this illusion of choice is merely that, just an illusion. The game subverts the concept of player agency through the character of Monika, who is self-aware of her existence as a character in a game. She begins to manipulate the game files, deleting characters, and even altering the game's narratives in a way that completely bypass player choices. This breaking of the fourth wall forces players to confront the realization that their sense of control is entirely fabricated. In DDLC, the player is not the master of the story. Rather, they are participants in a narrative that has been meticulously crafted by the game's design. This theme of lost agency speaks to the broader question of whether free will exists in any narrative, especially within the confines of a medium like video games, where the story is always bound by predetermined coding and programming. By forcing players to confront their lack of control, DDLC challenges that notion that games, as an interactive experience, allow for true agency. The game plays with the expectations of the player, demonstrating that their choices have often no real bearing of the outcome. This reinforces the idea that much of what we perceive as control is in fact an illusion. Another prominent theme in DDLC is the exploration of mental health, particularly the internal struggles the characters face in silence. The game introduces us to the four distinct characters, Sayori, Yuri, Natsuki, and Monika, each of whom initially fits a common archetype found in visual novels. It becomes evident, though, that these outward personas mask a much darker, more complex reality. Sayori, the protagonist's childhood friend, initially appears to be so bubbly and energetic, but it's soon revealed that she struggles with severe and deep depression. Her outward cheerfulness is just a mask that hides her inner feelings of worthlessness. Her eventual suicide is one of the most jarring moments in the game, serving as a painful reminder of the often invisible nature of mental health issues. Sayori's tragic fate challenges the player to reflect on the idea of masking one's pain for the sake of others, or pretending to be happy when you're actually not. This exploration within DDLC brings light to the importance of acknowledging mental health struggles and the fact that many people suffer in silence, even when they appear fine on the outside. Other characters in the game also reveal their own hidden mental challenges. Yuri, for example, exhibits obsessive tendencies, and Natsuki hides a troubled home life and a desire for validation. These struggles are not immediately obvious, but become clearer as the game progresses, reinforcing the idea that players' external appearances do not always reflect on their internal battles. The game forces players to confront uncomfortable truths about the human experience, offering a narrative that speaks to the complexities of mental health in a world where people often feel the need to hide their pain. Through its portrayal of these struggles, Doki Doki encourages players to reflect on the importance of empathy and understanding when dealing with others. The game makes it clear that mental health is not something that can be easily fixed or overlooked, and the impact of untreated emotional struggles can have devastating consequences. Another critical aspect of Doki Doki is its commentary on the nature of storytelling itself. The game constantly plays with narrative expectations, shifting from a lighthearted dating simulator to a dark, horror-driven psychological thriller. This drastic tonal shift challenges the player's assumptions about the medium. What seems to be like a typical dating game, where the player chooses their romantic interest, quickly devolves into something far more sinister. The game's manipulation of its own structure highlights the artificial nature of storytelling in video games. Throughout the experience, players are forced to confront the idea that the story they are experiencing is a construction, a series of choices, codes, and events created by a developer to elicit specific reactions. The game repeatedly breaks the fourth wall by having characters acknowledge their existence as fictional entities and by showing players the underlying code that powers the game. This technique emphasizes the distinction between reality and fiction, raising questions about the role of the player in a narrative and their ability to influence the story. Monika's role as this game's antagonist embodies this theme in almost a direct way. As she takes control of the game's narrative and deletes the other characters, Monika demonstrates the power the storytellers hold over their own creations. This raises questions about the ethical responsibility of those who create stories, whether in video games, literature, or other forms of media. What happens when creators manipulate their creations in a way to cause harm? DDLC uses Monika's manipulation of the game world to explore this question, forcing players to grapple with the consequences of controlling others, even within fictional narratives. One of the most profound aspects of DDLC, though, is its self-awareness. The game exists within a space where the boundaries between game world and real world blur. Characters are aware they're in a game, and this awareness makes them question their existence and the player's involvement in their lives. Monika, in particular, directly engages with the player, breaking the fourth wall and acknowledging that they have control over the game's actions. This meta-narrative aspect challenges players to reconsider their role in the game, highlighting the often passive nature of their interactions and forcing them to confront the implications of their actions in a controlled environment. Through this self-awareness, DDLC speaks to the larger idea of agency in gaming and storytelling. While players may believe that they are in control of the narrative, the game reveals that they are ultimately a part of a system with limited power dynamics between players and creator. DDLC uses its meta nature to ask fundamental questions about the boundaries between reality and fiction, the role of the player, and the ethics of creating and controlling characters. Doki Doki Literature Club is a game that defies easy categorization, using its subversive storytelling, explorations of mental health, and commentary on player agency to challenge traditional concept of narrative and control. By breaking the fourth wall and manipulating player expectations, the game raises important questions about the nature of choices in storytelling, the complexity of mental health, and the ethical responsibilities that creators have. DDLC represents more than just a dark twist on the visual novel genre. It's a meditation of the limits of free will, the hidden struggles of individuals, and the power that creators hold over their narratives. Ultimately, DDLC invites players to reflect on the deeper implications of the stories they consume and the role they play in shaping those stories. In conclusion, Doki Doki Literature Club is far more than just a game. It's a psychological nightmare that taps into the darkest corners of the human mind. It takes what seems like a sweet, innocent dating simulator and flips it on its head using horror, not through gore or jump scares, but through psychological manipulation and the breakdown of trust. The game isn't just about scares, it's about making you question everything you thought you knew about narrative, control, and even your role as a player in a game. What DDLC does so well is blur the lines between fiction and reality, forcing you to face uncomfortable truths about mental health and the impact of those who suffer in silence. It shows you the hidden struggles of characters, not through external violence, but through their internal battles, which are far more unsettling. The horror here isn't just in the shocking moments, it's in the gradual realization that you, as the player, are not in control. That you're complicit in a story that's not just manipulating the characters, but yourself as well. Heck, this entire video hasn't even mentioned the Plus version, which more enforces these ideas and themes. Ultimately, DDLC represents the intersection of horror and psychology in a way that few games do it. It challenges you to face the dark side of choices, the weight of responsibility, and the powerlessness that often comes with being a part of someone else's narrative. And in doing so, it leaves you questioning what it means to truly be in control, and what happens when that control is taken from you.